Pleasure to
very
meet you.
happy to thanks for joining today's event.
Same here.
Thanks for your valuable time.
Delighted to join.
Yeah. So Tata, do you want to let's say briefly discuss the sequence of events?
Sure. Hello, everyone. This is Ganesh here. Hi, Aviral.
Hi, Ganesh.
Hi, Dr.
Ganesh.
Ganesh. Nice to meet you. Hi, Krishna. So the sequence of events would be, I would first probably just briefly introduce what we are going to talk about today in the panel discussion and give a very rough agenda so that everyone knows where we're moving towards, and then start off with talking about the first topic, that is how we can leverage AI to drive business value. And for that, I'll primarily be conversing with Aviral for that. And then I'll slowly shift from there to Swaraj, where we'll be talking more about the importance of software engineering practices, and also will be in between, will be queuing in Aviral as well, because of the leadership standpoint, it will be very useful to know about how software engineering is actually useful and how data science teams can actually grow more if they inculcate a culture of software engineering. And the final discussion would be on recruitment, and we'll be talking about how students particularly can improve their profile if they're applying for data science jobs, and how can they hone their skills. So that will be the rough agenda for today.
Sure. And I think we should ask the students to just ping their questions or whatever. I mean, if there's a huge group, then they should keep so that you can also keep asking those
I
questions.
will be handling that, Aviral.
Sure.
So what I will do is I will collate all the questions. I don't think it's practically feasible to unmute each one of them. So
Yeah,
I'll
obviously.
collate and then I'll pass it on to Tata, and he'll put those questions to you, or if it's
Yeah.
relevant to his domain, he himself will.
Yeah. I think what we can do is that within the conversation itself, to make it more engaging for the audience as well, we can keep asking questions. So Tata, you can probably use those questions and keep asking those questions so that we can make it more engaging.
Sure, Aviral, I can definitely do that. Thank you.
Yeah, thanks. By the way, if we have a pause or anything, I have prepared a few slides as well, as I had mentioned. So if there is something, then we can go for those slides as well to make it more concrete. So I built some pointers for us. Based on the agenda itself, I have prepared slides in the background. So I'm sorry, I have been a management consultant all my life. So I mean, half an hour before the meeting, I just need to get my points so that I'm prepared.
Tata, can you do something about your lighting as well? So hi everybody, I'm Krishna. I'm the president of the Vita Hyderabad chapter. It gives me great pleasure to welcome all of you. This year we have crossed the 1 lakh mark as alumni, and as Vita, we've been organizing numerous initiatives to help both our alumni and current students. And as all of you are aware, data science is talked about a lot and is hyped as well. At least VIT on its part has launched a lot of programs both at the undergrad and master's level for data science, big data analytics, AI, machine learning. And this is to cater to the demand and also give students the right education and skill set in this sector. On behalf of Vita Bangalore and Hyderabad, we present Navigating Data Science, a webinar with our own alumni to help you discover and also demystify data science to cut through the hype. Minor housekeeping rules before I introduce the moderator. All of you are requested to stay muted. If you have questions, please put them in the chat. I will collate all of them for you, and we will have 10 minutes for Q&A in the end. But we will also see if we can rope them into the conversation along the way. Also, to the speakers, please keep your phones on silent so there's no interruptions in between. So yeah, now to introduce the moderator, Tata Ganesh, BTech CS grad of 2017. He's worked at 2 startups on computer vision and image processing. He is currently a grad student and researcher at University of Alberta in Canada. The floor is yours, sir. You can-
Thank you so much, Krishna, for the wonderful introduction. And I would first like to thank Vita for organizing this wonderful event. I'm pretty sure it will be very useful for everyone who's trying to get into data science or wants to know more about data science in general. So I would just like to briefly set the agenda for today. We'll be primarily talking about navigating data science, that is how you can cut through the hype in data science, and we will touch upon topics that are useful for people who are getting into data science or professionals who are trying to shift into data science or organizations that actually want to leverage data science. So let me just quickly jump in and start with a particular event that happened in 2016, which was that a computer program named AlphaGo beat a highly rated player named Lee Sedol in a game called Go. And this was a breakthrough event because an AI had never beaten a particular human player in a game ever before, apart from chess. And this was great for AI because it was a research breakthrough. However, breakthroughs like this, even though they create headlines, they also generate a lot of hype around artificial intelligence, machine learning, and data science. So someone sees the headline and they're like, oh, wow, this is fantastic. But when organizations actually, or business leaders actually need to leverage AI for the benefit of the business, this hype doesn't really work, and they need to look beyond it. That is, they need to cut through the hype to see how they can actually use the AI for the good of the business. So on that note, I would like to first introduce our first panelist, Mr. Aviral Mathur, who is the head of data science at the Hindustan Times Media Group. And apart from launching his own startup, he also has rich experience working with the Boston Consulting Group and Absolute Data Analytics. Welcome, Aviral. And my first question to you would be, since you have a lot of experience working in this field, how have you been able to leverage technologies like big data to sort of derive business value in your organizations?
So first of all, I think it is very important to understand that most organizations are not able to drive value, right? In fact, when I was in BCG, we actually did a survey and we talked to various business leaders. And what we realized from the survey itself was, and this is a published survey and anybody can find it online, that only 10% of the organizations actually make significant value or gain significant value from their AI program, only 10%, right? So that sets the bar for organizations pretty high to actually derive. So what happens generally is that most organizations are able to build good POCs, right? Somebody sitting in a lab is able to demonstrate something which works, right? But it's not able to scale at an enterprise level, right? So that's one of the major challenges when it comes to driving value from AI. How do you take that POC, which has demonstrated some initial value, and set it into an enterprise-wide context, right? So basically, so this is coming from personally my consulting experience. Then I will talk about more how do you drive value as well. But what we realized was that within that value generation concept, right, only 10% or 70, the 10% of the value comes from actual algorithm development, right? 20% comes from the technical infrastructure, right? What you call data engineering, DevOps, software engineering, all that kind of stuff, great stuff that actually makes those algorithms live and scale. But 70% of the value actually comes from change management, or how do you actually get AI deployed in an enterprise-wide setting so that people actually are able to use it and make it live, right? Or actually use it on a day-to-day basis, right? So organizations often forget that, right? So it's a combination, right? So when I think about AI itself, to generate business value, various roles need to come together, right? Data science is just one role in that entire piece, right? Then comes data engineers, right, who take this data, do the plumbing, create the data infrastructure, right, to actually make sure that you're able to use real data, right, to get these things, these algorithms out there, which is machine learning and data engineering, which I would use interchangeably. Then comes the DevOps guys, right, who actually productionize these things, make it live, make it into a production server, deploy it, stuff like that, right? The UI UX guys, right, who are able to generate those intuitive interfaces to ensure that the whatever the recommendations are, they're going to the user and he can use it, consume it, and make it live, right? Then the product managers who actually help with defining, or business analysts defining what exactly should be done, right? Super critical role that product managers play, who actually understand tech and all these pieces they put together. They help to put together all these things. And then there are the analytics guys who actually are responsible for performance management of various models. Various algorithms are going live. They're competing with each other. What is working, what is not working, what needs to go out, what needs to come in, right? So all that performance management across the enterprise-wide systems need. Now, if any of these pieces are not working, value won't come, right? Now, this is coming. I know this because I mean, I've been working in this field for a long time and working on driving value from within organizations and drive value. And this is all that it takes, right? Now, there are various lessons that I have learned. How do you actually get the leadership buy-in and all those kinds of things? There are other learnings as well, but this is the bare minimum that you need to actually drive value in a multi-billion-dollar or a huge organizations. I don't know if that makes sense. And yeah, that point.
That makes a lot of sense, Abhidal, that data science is just a very small part among several other components that need to be taken care of. I would also like to know about how leveraging value from something like AI is either difficult or slightly different from just building regular software products in your view. As to how does it differ and why do organizations find it so difficult with respect to AI is there a component of uncertainty that makes it difficult?
It is. And that's a very good question. That's a very good question. That's one of the first pieces that now I'm the head of data science, but I have, as I said, I'm a consultant all my life, right? So that is one of the first things that you actually need to educate the leadership, that there is something called engineering driven output, and then there's a data science driven output. Right? Data science driven output is highly probabilistic, right? Can you guys hear me, or my network just went out?
We can hear you. We can hear you.
I think your video froze, Abhiraj, but we can hear you.
So now we can't hear you.
Yeah, I think he got disconnected.
Am I back? Hello?
Yes, we can hear you.
Sorry,
Yes.
I don't know what happened. Very sorry. Yeah, go ahead. Sorry, I lost my chain of thought.
We were just discussing about why is it difficult for organizations to derive value from AI in comparison to maybe working on others.
I think organizations, firstly, product startups or product companies actually realize the value of iterations, right? At least that's there. So they ingrainedly understand that there is going to be an iteration, then you will improve it, and then you'll improve it further, right? So when we are going to interact with these kinds of organizations, it becomes easier, right? To have that conversation that, look, data science, we'll start small and then we'll keep scaling it up, right? But when you go into more traditional based focused organizations, there it becomes very difficult to sell data science, right? Or get them accustomed to data science, because they have not gone through the process of iteration and then rapidly scaling a smaller thing and then keep building it up, right? Product companies have done that, but traditional companies don't actually understand it, right? So they are used to that. Okay, I had this website and that's my tech, right? So it's very difficult for them to understand that there's going to be POCs, and then we will keep iterating and keep improving, and then we're going to scale, and the value will come across time, right? So that that is a mindset that we need to develop and educate. That's a lot of education that needs to come in, right? When you're talking to senior leaders, so that they can become accustomed to this way of thinking, right? So there's a mindset change that needs to be inculcated so that the value comes in, right? So that brings me to the most important point, that if you want AI programs to succeed, right, the first and foremost step is leadership buy-in, right? That leadership needs to believe that the value will come, right? Because it's not going to come initially. So they need to back it, right? For the AI leader, it's more about how do you build those incremental wins, which you get more compass, right? And keep funding the program as you go ahead, right? So within that context, you have to also understand that to support the tech infrastructure, it's a huge tech infrastructure. For example, if you want to build a personalization program, right, you need to build a customer data platform first, right, which is a huge investment, right? So data science just brings up some value, and then you keep building this platform in the process and keep getting the engineering done, get the incremental value there, so that you keep funding the journey, right? Because this is the journey itself, right? So it's very important to get those incremental wins to actually get and that leads to, again, management buy-in, and then you keep getting the value more and more, and then overall direction, right? Are you moving in the right direction? You have to always have that compass there, that okay, I understand that, okay, are you moving in the right direction? Are you attacking the right problem? Is this the right problem to solve, right? Because often what happens is that if you're solving the wrong problem, you will never get that scale, right? So when you're in the enterprise-wide setting, it's very important to actually get some of these components right to actually fund the value and get the value out, right? Because otherwise, 6 months down the line, the CEO will become, yeah, this is a stupid program, let me just shut it down, right? Because if you keep showing him some POCs and you tell him this is the R square and I've improved the R square by 20%, he won't understand that, right? Because you have to build out there with real dollars to make sure that you are able to fund the journey, right? So these are the things that come in to actually get the value out, right? And driving business value.
That makes a lot of sense. Yeah, that makes a lot of sense, that adoption is really important and everyone has to accept that there is an uncertainty while adopting AI, but there are maybe risks associated with it as well. But if all the necessary components are in place, then it is possible to be able to leverage value from it. And I'm pretty sure that you yourself must have at some point in your career initially must have found yourself in a position where you are, as a leader, trying to leverage AI, and maybe there were a lot of roadblocks, and then you move forward from there to be able to actually use AI in the business properly. Are there any particular use cases that you can think of that the audience might benefit from to understand more about how you were able to derive some sort of value or be able to make a product which had some sort of an AI component to it, and how you were able to do it successfully as well?
Yeah, so actually I'm is this better? Yeah. The internet connection? Yeah. So so in my current program itself, in my current role itself, right, organization had been on a personalization program for about 2.5, 3 years and had seen no value, right? Tremendous loss of resources. CEO had no confidence and stuff like that, right? How do you actually change that vision to today request on our AI algorithms that we have and successfully generating X percentage of revenue every day, every month, right? So again, so personalization program, right? Classical use case, everybody can understand that there are recommended for you feeds that are going on. You see relevant stories when you're browsing through various stories. You see that, okay, you have read this story, these are the other relevant stories to this, right? Based on your behavior, we are improving those algorithms again in the background to come up with that, okay, these are the ones that you should be read. Because you read about Shah Rukh Khan and Malaika Arora, I'm going to show you Vicky. Right now, Katrina Kaif and Vicky Kaushal's wedding is going on. I'll show you those stories, right? Because you read about astrology, I'm going to show you the Rashi Fal of whatever, right? So those are the things that are already happening, right? And I'm driving now when we embarked on the journey, we actually went for, okay, where are we going to find the maximum value, right? Which are the ones where we can show immediate value so that the CEO gets confidence, right? So you start pulling in, okay, what is the maximum impact that I'm going to generate, and where I can show immediate impact. I mean, in terms of effort, it is less least, right? Whereas the value is maximum, effort is least, right? From all the initiatives that I had planned, right? Okay, I have like 50 initiatives for 25 initiatives. Where is this, right? And we identified, okay, these are the two that we should be attacking, right? You should not build probably a recommended for you, which is much tougher problem to solve on the first day. Don't take that up, right? We take up a content-based recommendation, right? Which immediately within 2-3 months started showing us value, right? I mean, it was immediately showing us millions of clicks. And we took the highest property, right? That we thought that, okay, we saw where the engagement rates were higher, right? And we knew that, okay, so for example, a financial news has lesser engagement than a site like Hindustan Times, which is a broader based site, right? Higher engagement is going to be there, right? So it's very important to firstly attack the right problem, which is going to show you value, right?
Yeah.
If you take a much tougher challenge, because we are all engineers at heart, right? We love to take on the most difficult challenge in the first go, and it's going to be difficult, right? Now, if you don't have those incremental wins in the initial stages, you won't be able to fund the journey. You won't be able to fund the program, right? So never take, so those are the kind of things that you need to do to actually set the context that, okay, this is what the problem that I want to attack, right? I'm going to show immediate value. People are going to be happy. And then I will fund the journey because I will get more resources or more investment or more time, right? So that's what that's what I did and continue to do, right? So I get a lot of, I mean, it's a continuous process, right? I mean, you keep getting feedback from users that, okay, now we are in a mature stage that, okay, we're trying to figure out a much tougher problem. For example, Hindi-based models and Bangla-based models, right? It's much tougher problem to solve the vernacular problem, right? But now we have the, so to speak, the airstrip, right, to keep going, and because management also has some confidence that, yeah, these guys will probably do it because they have proved some value.
Definitely. Yeah, I think that makes a lot of sense with respect to the fact that businesses should look at specific metrics that they want to achieve or specific goals that they want to achieve, and probably first try to target the simpler ones rather than going for the more complicated ones, because they'll be harder given the complexity that is already inherent in AI. So thank you for that, Aviral. And based on what Aviral just mentioned about different components being present in the context of AI, where the AI component is just a small part in a set of other things that are also part when you're making either a product or a service, we would like to talk more about software engineering in general. So we need to acknowledge that a business can only thrive if the technology that powers the different products and services is actually good enough. Otherwise, there's no point in moving forward with the business at all, because the tech behind it has to be good enough. So generally, the data science or the ML portion, as Aviral mentioned, is a small component among many other components in the technology stack of a product or an application. And usually the glue that ties all of these together is usually software engineering. Now, there are different forms of it. Like you can say data engineering is a whole new discipline. Software engineering is an older discipline, but in general, software engineering principles would definitely apply to data science, particularly whenever you're creating a product or a service and deploying it somewhere and so on. So that brings me to our next speaker, who is Swaraj Fartare, who is an alumnus of VIT and who studied MS in software engineering. And he's presently working as a DevOps engineer at a UK-based company named Nethermind. And he's in a really good position to talk to us about software engineering and data science. Welcome, Swaraj. And let's start by discussing about why software engineering is actually important in the context of data science. Why someone who's trying to get into data science should actually have software engineering skills.
Right. So Okay, so let's start with one of the first things that I did when I entered the software industry. So I was actually told that, hey, there are people who are trying to use our CI/CD platform, and then there are so many queries that keep getting generated because people are unable to figure out how to use the platform. And then I was given this task wherein I have to make a chatbot which would answer all the developer queries. So it sounds a very simple problem, but it is a disaster to take this decision, and I'll come to the reason why. Because in general, when you talk about building a model, you the first thing that you need is clean data, and without clean data, there is nothing that the model can actually do. It is much better to have a person sitting and answering the queries on behalf of the bot, right? So now when I was given this task, I imagined that, hey, there would be a data set, there would be the Excel, the CSV file wherein I would have certain queries and the responses to that queries. But you know what, it didn't really happen. I was just told that you have to make it. And so when you talk about building a product from scratch, you first need to start figuring out from where do you get the data. So that's the most important thing. So how do you source your data right now? So then, like, just trying to make it relatable with the use case that that I was currently solving, that I was solving back then. So now what happened is that, there were developers who were asking queries on the Slack channel. So we figured out that, okay, let's pick up the queries from here and let's look at the human answer that the like somebody has an answer to that, right? So from the Slack thread, we actually started pulling out data, and we started formulating a database for ourselves. So this is, I think, in software engineering terms, this is called requirement gathering, requirement elicitation, and all of these principles. In context of data, it actually means data gathering. And when you talk about data gathering, of course, the very natural step that would follow would be data cleaning, because when people ask queries, people are like, how to do this, and some people will use short forms and some people will use slangs, and a lot of them would actually use Hindi because that's what was being practiced over there. So now the bigger task is how do you actually clean the data in such a way that you can actually train your models at some day. It won't be a job that would be done in a day. It would probably take months and even years. Like, to get a very good model, it could potentially take years. So that's when we started out. Now, touching upon some points that Avril actually pulled out. So how do you actually make sure that it is like the management feels that this is not a completely useless effort, right? So what we tried to do is, as soon as we started getting data, the queries that would match to 90%. So we first had a Elasticsearch uh, set up, and then we would just check for the cosine similarity, which would, if it matches more than 95%, 100%, we would just put out the queries. If not, we would actually ask the user that, hey, these are some questions that were asked in the past. Do you think that this is something that you feel is correct? Now, if you think about it again from the software engineering perspective, then what we are trying to do is getting customer validation as soon as we have the things ready. So we're constantly asking the customer, hey, this is what we're trying to build over here, and these are some things. Are we going in the right direction? If yes, then it just adds a score to it. So this is somewhat similar to the reinforcement learning concept in general. But then this is how we started building. And look, over a period of time, we actually had a huge data set that was just built out of developer queries and people answering. And also, we, like, every week, what we used to do is, just to ensure that the data is of the purest quality, we used to send out the CSV to all the concerned on call. So we had this concept of on call, and the on call would just have a check mark that, okay, this is what the bot answered. Is the bot correct or is the bot wrong? And this again added back to our reinforcement learning loop. So this is how we kept building data. So now when you look about it from the software engineering perspective, this is actually the evolutionary model. So instead of going in a waterfall model wherein you try to do everything at once, you don't do it. You try to pick out pieces, try to make sure that at least you have something to give to the customer. It might not be perfect from day one, and it will surely not be perfect. There is no probability that you will actually release a perfect product on day one. It's absolutely impossible. So then this is the mechanism that we followed, and we didn't really tackle all the things on the first day, right? So we didn't really have MLOps pipeline for deployments and all of these things. So we first focused on the things that needed focus, and slowly as the model started growing, as we started doing things, then we slowly started building the other pieces. So there is a huge effort that goes into this from the DevOps perspective, because deploying models is not really easy. Then there is huge efforts, like even if you talk about like I'll just give another example, that building models is still a easy job, but then actually running models on scale is extremely tough. And in general, people do use Python, and Python, as we all know, is not very compute intensive. Is not very compute optimized, right? So I know of use cases. One of my architects who worked at a very big organization in India, they had deployed models like using Python, and their models also used to run in Python, and then they used to run it on 71 different large VMs. So slowly, what people actually realized that, hey, this is getting a bit more expensive. Like the value that we're generating out of it, we're actually ended up spending more than the value on just running these models. That's when they figured out that, hey, we also want the value, but we don't want to give up on, like, we don't want to have such enormous costs. So then they started the optimization phase, wherein they converted all the models to a language called Rust. I don't know if people have used Rust, but then they did that, and then their 71 VMs got reduced to 17 VMs. So that was like a tremendous optimization. And that's where the wheel of software engineering happens. You start off with a POC, you start growing over the product, and slowly just try to make the product better and better. So yeah, that's what I believe. That's the reason why if you have software engineering principles with you, then things become a lot more easier. And in general, I do believe that a lot of software developers do not really pay attention to business side of things. It's like we as engineers become so romanticized, is the word that I would like to use over here, with our product, that we don't really bother about the other things. But then it's always that, and I think the software engineering portion is actually the bridge between the two. Software engineering actually binds the business processes with the technical aspects of things. That's the reason why I would actually suggest everybody who enters into data science to have their software engineering principles with them.
Definitely. Yeah, that's a very, those are a very good set of points centered around a nice chatbot use case, which I think everybody can relate to very well, Swaraj. I think and the point about Python not being efficient enough is also important, because students, when they start off in college, people are usually starting off with Python. They're like, "Ooh, it's great. I mean, 10 lines of code, it's awesome." But then once you start doing it and once you start deploying it, you see, wait, I'm waiting for 3 days to get some result. Like, well, it's not that great. And just to extend what Swaraj just mentioned, I would just like to add that if you're well versed in software engineering skills, you're just not understanding the data science part of your product or your service. So you sort of know where your data science, your contribution as an ML model or as some sort of an analytics engine, where does it sit in the entire product or the entire service that you built. So once you understand that, you can sort of answer questions like, for example, how is the model that you built actually deployed on the cloud? So you built the model, great, but do you know how it's deployed on the cloud? Do you know the process that goes behind the model sitting somewhere in some VM? What's happening there? Usually people do not know that. And once you have the software engineering skills, like for example, the ones that Swaraj mentioned, it gives you a better purview of the entire system in itself. Some other things that you might be able to think about is what kind of API interface is used to interact with the model. So in general, when we are in college, we generally do not know a lot about APIs per se. Like it's sort of a thing that you understand when you start off internships or when you're doing a job where you know, oh, there's something called an API. Seem to have heard of it in a software engineering class, but you're not really sure about it. So that's something that can happen. And a good example of understanding the entire flow is, let's say you build a model that interacts with the web application. Like, for example, we spoke to Avidal and he was mentioning about recommendation systems where articles are recommended to the web page there. So you can think of the flow of information, the flow of the request response that's happening when a person is clicking on an article, what are the APIs that are being called from the front end, and when is your model actually interacting with the actual application. That kind of flow will give you a better perspective on the entire system in general, and it will also help you to understand where are you bringing in value to the entire system. And when you actually work on other models, or maybe a second iteration of the same recommendation model itself, you now have an idea of where does your contribution sit in the entire system, which is just fantastic. Just to extend that point that I was mentioning, many software engineering best practices also apply to data science. For example, version control, which is used to manage changes in computer programs. So if you have been writing code, you would be aware of Git, which is used for version control. Now, the concept of version control can be directly applied to machine learning models as well. How? You can think of a version of a model having a particular accuracy or some certain metrics. So you can say, well, I've released this model which does cats versus dogs classification and does about 92% accuracy, and it's deployed, it's fantastic. And then you say to your boss that, hey, I've developed a better model which has about 96 to 97% accuracy. And you say, oh, I can now deploy this model. So that becomes version 2. And it's important to distinguish between these two versions, because one version of the model is actually better than the other. And the sooner people realize this, the better they can build models and also look at data science as a component of a whole software or a technology stack, rather than just being a single piece. And on that note, I would also like to shift to Aviral and talk about why it's important, as from a leadership perspective, to inculcate the software engineering mindset that Swaraj spoke about in a data science team, and how do you ensure that software engineering practices are actually enforced in today's data science teams?
That's a tough one. Actually, that's what I mean, in my career, I have been struggling, right, to get data science. So I think one of the ways is, first and foremost, that when you are the key success, again, from the business standpoint perspective, is that it's the same team that is firstly working, right? I mean, they can't be working in silos, right? So when you build an agile team, right, to deliver certain business values, certain business metrics that you need to drive, your product manager, data engineer, data science, all are sitting in the same team, and DevOps as well. They're sitting in the same team, right? So they work very closely with each other. In fact, we have got into situations where or validates the code that is being written by data science or data engineers, so that you know that the right set of metrics or the right set of expectations are being delivered, right? Because there is a lot of things which happen in the middle. Now what is happening on the ground, right? A lot of times, and most teams are following this. Most teams is what is happening is that Python is used to generate your POCs. It still is, right? Because we want to work quickly on iterations, right? And what you do in general is that you form that API bridge or whatever, that, okay, requests are coming in, and you give a certain very, very less percentage to the POC itself. And you keep checking, keep validating that, okay, you do an A/B testing, right? Experimentation is the key. And once you're sure about your model, that, okay, my rusty, I mean, not rust, I know, but your whatever way that you have built that POC of 1% traffic, 2% traffic, it is mature enough. Then you actually get into other language, and you have to actually keep changing it entirely into a language like Spark or whatever. Right? Spark is my go-to language to actually productionize anything when you're trying to. So today, HT Media actually caters to about 160 million people come every month, right? That's 16 crore people actually visit HT Properties, right? So I lead about 7 websites, right? These 7 websites actually cater to 16 crore people every month, right? It's a huge 16% of population, or probably 15% of population of India is actually visiting these servers. And that's why I said that this is just huge in terms of the kind of volume that you're talking about, in terms of the requests that you're serving every second, right? It becomes a throughput problem. So how do you actually scale your application? Now, the algorithm that we have developed, if it takes it, that the revenue will start dipping if your job takes 1 hour to 2 hours or 3 hours, right? It's all critical, right? So we keep reducing the job time and all that kind of stuff, because everything has an impact, revenue impact, exactly, right? So what is happening on the ground now is that the data scientists in my team, at least, I am actually making them experienced in Spark as well. So they've started coding in Spark, right? So POCs are being run there, but they actually contribute some of the Spark things. So they are interacting very regularly with data engineers. So, and they are inculcating that habits into their daily life as well, right? So when the data scientist, a lot of the data science, actually, when I started off, I was just building these POCs. In fact, my first few jobs when I was in a purely in a consulting role, I was just creating presentations, right? I was just making presentations out of it. But now with data engineering and with engineering and data science converging, and this trend happened about 5-6 years back, right? 5, 6, 7 years back, when all these fields started converging together. That's when the ML ops and all these things started coming in. Now, but now it's very close. That's data engineers and data science work together, and data scientists are regularly now understanding the software engineering principles as well, and they're able to some part of it they're able to get in, right? So earlier, when we basically started off, even when I was building this team, so I had very young guys, right? Basically they basically just knew Python, right? But now after some time, they started contributing to Spark code base. Now the data engineers are actually leading the way, because they won't let them check in the code, right? So that's how they are learning, right? And that's how they are also inculcating those principles, the software engineering principles, within their everyday life as well. Although it's difficult for them to shift, because data science are generally in that continuously interactive mode, right? They'll either change kar do, let's just change this, let's just change that, because they're constantly in experimentation mode. Let's change this, let's change the time duration in this, let's change this, making those small tweaks. But engineers generally are that, if I make this change, would my stack go down? And they're constantly worried, right? But there's once they're in the part of the same team, and they're part of the same, they understand each other's pain, right? That's how you make these things real. Otherwise, what happens is that there's just shifting of blame or responsibility, actually blame. Data engineers are stupid, and data engineers say data science guys don't know anything, right? But when you put them in the same team and same room, they understand each other's pain. That's how you build agile team, and you create business value. If they're working in isolation, value won't come.
I think that's a great place to conclude the software engineering discussion, that in isolation, people can never work. So as a data scientist, or even as a person, as a student, when you're starting off working on it, you are never thinking about sort of the other components, and you're only working towards your thing. And once you're thrown as an intern or as a full-time person, people tell you to go and talk to the integrations team, you go and talk to the engineering team, and half of your day just goes in meetings. So you think, oh, wow, I never realized. I thought I would be writing PyTorch and Keras code to make models. And that's a really good conclusion to the software engineering discussion, that it's important for people to know those skills early on in their career itself. And that brings me to a good point regarding careers in data science and how one should think about getting into data science. So we've spoken about two different things. We've spoken about business value, and we've spoken about software engineering. And usually whenever companies are looking to hire people, if they're looking for experienced professionals, they're looking for people who have actually been able to leverage business value in other organizations, or let's say they have skills that they are really looking for. So just a general question to the panelists: what are recruiters actually looking for in terms of data science skills, and are there any particular ways in which candidates, especially students who are part of the audience today, how can they stand out? And I would first like to start with Swaraj regarding this question. So what are your views on skills that are important for someone who's trying to get into data science, who's applying for data science jobs, or even for that matter, trying to shift into data science?
Right. So this is like a multi-part question because it actually varies depending on what role are you applying for. So if it's an intern role, then things are different. So let me briefly tell you my things that I hire for. So in general, I am building a family of data related products. So I currently work in the blockchain space, and in blockchain, the data that is generated is enormous. It's very, very huge. So that's the reason why when I look for people to join in my data team, so I generally look at masters of all. So I would love the person to have a good understanding of blockchain, even though the person might not actually directly work on blockchain, but it is important for the person to have the domain knowledge that we call. So I think domain knowledge actually works in the favor. And then again, software engineering principles. But over all of these, so in general, if anybody has attended one of my interviews, I generally try to ask people questions which are very simple. Explain to me difference between supervised and unsupervised learning if I was a 5-year-old. And I think that if a person is actually able to tell me in a language that is super simple for anybody to understand, I think the person knows the concepts very, very well. And then I don't really need to bother about the details, because I think if it's a junior role, then people can actually start picking up on details as they go there, as they travel their journey in the data science world. But then if it's a senior level role, then we actually look at past work. So what are the sort of projects that you actually built on top on data science? Then what is it that would make you stand outside the crowd, I would say. Because in general, what I have seen is people, like, I go to their GitHub repositories. There is no way that I trust any person I interview. So I actually go to their GitHub repositories, because people say that, hey, they built a model and they did, I don't know how people just say that they have very high levels of accuracy. But then I think most of the times you look at their repositories, it's just some scikit code that is there and scikit-learn. So I don't think that a data science engineer is just about using the libraries. I also believe that I would actually ask the person to, if it's a senior level role, I would ask the person to actually code linear regression without using any sort of libraries. And trust me, there are very few people who actually are able to do that, because generally people don't know the math. So
Right.
I think data science is way beyond the libraries that we talk of. And I would also put a little bit of blame on universities, not VIT, but because in VIT you have a very, very good model culture of data science. So we have a center of excellence and we have a lot of things that go on in the data science world. But then there are people who actually think that data science is just about using libraries and do not know the math. So I think that's a very big red flag for any recruiter, that, like, math is I think the basis of on top of which everything else can be built. When we talk about using libraries, then the person, like Aviral mentioned, will struggle when he tries to write Spark code, because there are no
Yeah.
libraries over there. So
Yeah.
yeah, that's the sort of things that we at least look for.
I think these are very important, especially I think for students who are attending this talk, to understand that since you are also a fresh graduate, I suppose your perspective makes a lot of sense, because a lot of people will be graduating maybe in a year or two or so on. So it is very important to understand that the math is not just some magic happening behind in ML algorithms, rather it's something tangible. And if you look at it, it's great. And you also speak about the GitHub repos, and we have all been in a position where we have started a project and then, whoops, after a year, we look at it and we're like, I did start this project a year back, but I never proceeded with it. So it's a good thing to actually persist, because recruiters actually look for how persistently did you work on a project. Like if they see certain level of commits in your GitHub repository, they will be like, oh, okay, you've done a pretty good job in actually understanding the problem and working towards a solution for that. The same question, and to Aviral also, can you briefly talk about what skills do you see in someone who's applying for your team, or in general, what skills should one ramp up on before taking up a data science role?
So I think there are two parts to this question, right? One is, what should students be doing, right? And what should they be doing, right? I mean, what kind of skill sets, what they should be working on in college, How do they use their time to increase the chances of recruitment? And actually the question before this is actually who will recruit you, right? What are the options that you have in terms of recruitment, right? So let me start first with who will recruit you, because that's the most important question that students need to know, right? So there are going to be basically three kinds of places that you will get recruited to. One are pure product companies, right? Who are building a world-class product, the Googles, Microsoft, Facebook, or very well-funded startups, right? Who would be looking for those brilliant engineers, brilliant data scientists, right? They're going to be the product companies, right? They will have a different set of expectations. Second is the mass recruiters, right? The Mu-Sigmas of the world, EXLs of the world. A lot of people will find jobs there, right? A lot of people will job it. The Optum, Affine Analytics, Credence, a lot of people will find jobs there, right? And the third kind of companies are like us, right? Who are basically businesses, big businesses, large businesses, groups, conglomerates who happen to have a data science program within their overall product function, right? And they are trying to build their digital leadership and those kinds of roles, right? The best chance students who are younger will have is in the mass recruiters, obviously, right? Because they will come with large product companies is the second choice that are going to be there. The end, and they also recruit in numbers, right? And their appetite is growing. So there are lots of startups, lots of well-funded startups, lots of roles. End businesses have lesser roles. They generally have lesser, smaller teams, right? Because they will have lesser appetite, lesser this thing. Although they are also growing, but they are going to be lesser, right? I mean, ultimately, for example, like an HT Media will have a very small technology team. There's a huge print, digital readership team. That's not their core business, but they need to digitally change the way of functioning, and they need to invest in their future. So that is who will recruit you. Second is how do you actually develop your skill set? The first one question is, should you become a data scientist? A lot of people just become data scientist because it's in trend. If you are not good in math or you hate numbers, you won't like it, right? And if you get a boss like me who will just screw you like anything, and they'll tell you in 6 months down the line, you should not be a data scientist. You have chosen the wrong profession, and I have kicked people out of the team, right? Because they should not be a data scientist because they don't like numbers, right? They hate numbers, in fact, right? You should not become a data scientist if you hate numbers or maths, right? That's pretty, because you will become a bad data scientist, right? So first, that is very important. Right. Second, obviously, you need to have a GitHub repository. If you need to participate in the Kaggle challenges, because that will differentiate you from the crowd. Like we have so many resumes that come in, right? How will you differentiate, right? There's so many people who are coming in, all want data science jobs in good companies with a good package, right? How will you differentiate, right? So Kaggle is going to be critical. I heard a question, which language? Python is the language of choice, but then you should have a GitHub profile and Kaggle, right? Kaggle rank, that will just help you stand out, right? It will be easier for people to just recognize you and recruit you. At least you will go through the first phase very quickly, right? Your resume will get shortlisted and stuff like that, right? And then obviously, if you are good in numbers, you understand the process, you have actually done a few projects in Kaggle, you would be able to crack the interview anyway, right? But you should actually be interested in it, and you have to be inquisitive. You have to constantly that why is this happening? Why? Because engineering is very definite, right? This is the task. You get an output. You will keep improving or whatever, but it's definite. In data science, you're actually asking questions, continuously asking questions and trying to improve whatever, right? So that if you like experimentation, you're very curious, you like numbers, you will do very well in data science, right? Otherwise, you will not be, I mean, data science is not the only profession in the world. There are like thousands of roles in engineering, thousands of different kinds of roles in engineering, right? There's UI, UX, this, that, BI engineer, you can go data engineer. There's so many types of performance engineer, right? Thousands of kinds of engineering itself, right? Everybody doesn't need to become a data scientist. In fact, today I'm struggling for data engineering talent rather than data science talent. Data engineering talent is scarce like anything, right? I mean, it is very difficult to find Spark engineers. Very difficult to find good Spark engineers. Very difficult. Every organization that I'm talking to, the top consulting firms, the top firms, there are no Spark engineers, right? Or good Spark
Right.
engineers. So, I mean, if you are a good engineer, do Spark programming, that will stand you in much better stead rather than anything else.
For sure, for sure. I think those are really important points, particularly about first understanding whether you actually want to be a data scientist, and then moving towards having a good profile and portfolio. And also the scarcity of data engineers is really true, because I think a lot of people do not start off with data engineering, and that is the kind of the not so cool discipline when compared to something like data science.
Oh, but they're being
And
paid like anything. They're being paid like
yes,
anything.
definitely, and that's a good point to note down for everyone here, that yes, if you're not specifically looking for data science, data engineering also is a great profession to go into. And some incredibly great points brought up by both Swaraj and Aviral with respect to how you can improve your profile. And I would just like to touch upon a few specific points before I jump onto Q&A. The first thing is, personally, when I've filtered through a lot of resumes, I see people putting in a lot of MOOCs, massive online open courses, and they put in a lot of them in their resume, like it's split across the resume, or they are jumbled together in some way, and it just makes the resume look really stuffy. And I'm really not sure. It's sort of a negative thing for a resume if I see too many MOOCs there, because it seems as if you've done many things, but there is a lack of focus somehow. So it's important to put these MOOCs, but it's also important to put what you did using them. So for example, if you did an ML MOOC, you put, oh, I did this MOOC, but then I should be able to see a project somewhere in your project section, which actually says that you did actually do something after learning ML from Andrew Ng. Apart from that, we spoke about a GitHub repository. And it's also important to have your own personal website as well, apart from having a GitHub repository. It can be something really bare minimum. And hey, maybe the recruiter might not look at it, but it will actually give you an impression that you're putting yourself out into the world. So you're saying, hey, I'm going to create this website, and you post it on maybe some sort of a WhatsApp group. You might post it on the Vita Alumni Association group, and you say, hey, I have made this website. Please, can someone comment on it? I have done this project. And that gives you a kick. Someone might say, hey, you've done projects, but they're probably not enough. You might want to do a bit more so that you are recognized even more in the community, or recruiters start looking at what you are doing and they have more trust on your skills. And so I would really emphasize on having a website where you can link your GitHub repository as well, which overall shows that you are willing to showcase your skills in a nice and presentable way. And as Aviral mentioned once, that early on in his career, he was working more towards showing presentations and stuff. And for a data science, the storytelling part or the presentation part is equally important. And having a website actually does show that you have taken the effort to put yourself out there and showcase your skills effectively. With that, I would just, since in the interest of time, I would just like to jump into a few questions that have been asked here. I think one question is on cloud platforms, where Varun asks about which cloud platforms are preferred among AWS or Azure for data science. Does anyone have any thoughts on that among the panel members?
So I think I can take this one, especially because I have worked with all the clouds. So I'm primarily a DevOps engineer. So if you talk about clouds, I think if you talk about just the big three, all of them are pretty much the same. I would not say that one is bad or anything. It's all the same. However, AWS does have a little edge over the others because AWS actually started a lot earlier than the others. And in general, I like the management principles of Amazon. So I would incline towards Amazon, but then it's just a matter of personal preference. I don't think that it really makes a difference. However, with AWS, you have the option of having a lot of. So I think most of the student requirements are actually fulfilled under the free tier of AWS, and that's the reason why I would actually prefer using AWS for starters. But if you're already a working professional in the data science field, then you could go for any platform that you get like the best deals on. So sometimes it happens that you have free credit. I generally got free credits from AWS and I'm still using those. So for me, it works. And also, I think VIT has a partnership with AWS. So all the VIT members actually get Amazon Educate membership. So that also takes away some of your. I think if you can reach out to Naimullah Khan, if people over here are from VIT Chennai, you can reach out to Naimullah Khan, or yeah, Naimullah Khan sir would be the right contact to reach out to, and you should
That's
be able to get
fantastic.
your credits.
That's great. I think people here should definitely make use of the credits here so that they can understand more about AWS. Another question that has been asked is about interning and freelancing opportunities for people who are experienced and they want to start off with the data science endeavor. Would anyone like to take a shot at that?
I think the question is starting data science just to gain experience, like doing internships
Right.
and freelancing opportunities
Oh
to
yeah,
gain experience.
sorry. Yeah.
So in general, if you say that, hey, I am somebody who's applying for a data science role, but I don't know anything about data science, what would your option, like what would your reply be? I would say that, hey, learn something about data science, then come back to me, right? But then you're still like, no, I am a person who actually learns on the way. Then my suggestion to them would be that, hey, there are so many hackathons that keep happening around the globe, and nowadays most of them do happen online. So you can just pick up one of the hackathons, attend that hackathon, try to make a creative product out of it, and then come back to the recruiter saying that, hey, this is a product that I made, so I definitely have potential, and if you give me the opportunity, I might be able to do better in this sector. Then I would be much more inclined towards giving you that internship opportunity or freelancing role.
Definitely. Yeah. And yes, and it might also help. I don't know how far it helps to actually reach out to people who are freelancing in the field of data science. For example, if you're on LinkedIn, you could ping someone or talk to someone, maybe even post on, again, leverage the alumni network of VIT and see if someone is actually doing it, and they might be able to help you better, because freelancing has its own model in itself, and some people might be able to help you, some people might not be. So I would suggest doing that so that you have a better view of it. But
one
the
more
last,
interesting thing
yeah,
that I
please
would
go.
like to add to this is that in general, nowadays for getting internship, I see a lot of people actually posting their work and tagging the company that they're most interested in. So I saw this thing that was going viral a few days ago, which was the Cred UX UI role. So somebody made a beautiful video of Cred and then they just tagged all the guys of Cred, and people actually gave them the internships because they liked the work, they saw the work, and then they just gave away the internship. So I would actually love to talk to somebody who does it for my company, and I would surely at least get him on an interview, because that also shows me that you're highly interested in my company. And second thing is that you're actually motivated enough to do something. So those are two very important skills from my perspective.
That's very true, Swaraj. Thank you. So I think we're just in running out of time. So I'd just like to, in a few seconds, just like to summarize what we spoke about today. We discussed how you can leverage business value as an organization, where Aviral provided his own experience, based on his experience, spoke about how you can use technologies to ensure that you're able to bring in business value, and data science is just a small component among other things that actually make a product work. We then spoke about software engineering skills, where both Swaraj and Aviral chipped in and spoke about what they see are the most important skills in software engineering, particularly in data science teams. And finally, we concluded with particular tips with respect to resumes, with respect to your portfolio, and particularly with respect to Kaggle, GitHub repositories that are important for you to showcase your data science skills and shift to a career in data science. Thank you, everyone, for attending the talk. Yeah. Over to you, Krishna, and Apratam. Sorry.
Hey, hi everyone. It was a wonderful talk. I, Apratim Chatterjee, Vice President of Vita Bangalore. On behalf of Vita Bangalore and Hyderabad, express my gratitude to our panelists of the evening, Mr. Abhiral Mathur, Mr. Tata Ganesh, and Mr. Swaraj Pathare, who spared their time from their busy schedule to join us for this webinar on a Saturday evening and morning, and sharing their valuable insights and perspectives. The Vita office has been pillar of support in organizing this event. We thank Dr. Elizabeth Rufus, Dr. Kanish, and Ms. Uttara and the team for the support. Last but not the least, a big thanks to all of you present here for attending the webinar and make it meaningful for all of us. Thank you all. It was a wonderful webinar. Thank you. Thank you.
Thank you, Hyderabad team and Bangalore team. And thanks for the panelists for spending your valuable time with us. So all the, I also thank all the participants who are all available here for the passion listening. Thank you all. Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you so much. And any which ways, like, I think for me, VIT Alumni Association has already been helping. Like, even when I was still a student, VIT Alumni Association kept helping me. So I was always in touch with Apratim, with Dayanadi, and they always helped me for any sort of. So I feel that VIT Alumni Association is not just a network, but it's also more of a career guidance platform for people like me. Like when I was not into the software industry, I used to get a lot of help from these guys. So I think it's wonderful that whatever the VIT Alumni Association does, and it's a thing that we should all be proud of, because not many colleges do have such brilliant alumni associations. And I learned a lot from Tata Ganesh, Aviral, and yeah, that's how we keep rolling.
Yeah, thanks,
Likewise,
Swaraj. I
Swaraj.
think that was the same experience for me as well. I think I've reached out to Aviral and Tata on many occasions in the past. So I think all of us want to pay it forward to the other alumni and the students. So all of you can reach out to us on LinkedIn, or if you have our emails, you can reach out to us and we'll be happy to help you. Thank you so much.
Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you all.